Okay, so big welcome to everyone who made it back from the coffee break, and I take it that now that the music is gone, we can start our session. For those who are here, I think it's a very interesting session we have. We have 1 hour ahead, and we want to make the best use of the time. So our topic is to describe the new normal. So how does a crisis-delineated world impact SME development, and how should the SME finance space respond? So it's a lot for an hour. I'm very happy that I have a very interesting panel here, which is very diverse, with very different, I hope my mic is not coming down, with very different focus on SME finance. So I will let everybody introduce themselves when they speak first, but let me just still go, and I start on my left. Paolo Monaco, who is Director for Financial Products, SME Finance and Development at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Then we have Katarina, who is Director of Government Engagement at MasterCard. And then I turn to my right. I have Ioana Carlin Popescu, who is CEO of Agora Robotics. And then we have Jan Klesler, who is National Coordinator at the Ministry of Industry and Trade of the Czech Republic. And finally, Ivana Gazic, sorry for my hope pronunciation is okay, President of the Zagreb Stock Exchange. And I'm particularly happy, and I have to say it was a man who noted that we have a very balanced panel and that we have lots of female speakers, so I'm very glad. So I don't want to take up a lot of time as a moderator, just to know I'm Director of the European Commission in DG GROW. I used to be in charge for many years of SME policy, SME finance. I also spent 3 years on the board of the European Investment Fund. So that's why I'm really happy to see the perspectives we can bring in now. And of course, we have a huge program. We can go later, maybe in the conclusion, in terms of access to finance for SMEs under InvestEU. But now I would really like to start the first round. I would like to start with, I would say, a big sort of looking slightly back. I mean, we had all these different crises. I think the impression is that we moved from one crisis to the other. I mean, when we moved out of the COVID crisis and immediately went to supply chain crisis, and of course the major issues we have because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And what I would like to look at now is what are sort of lessons learned, what can we learn from the experience with the COVID crisis for the current situation, and what are the really challenges for SMEs now. So I would maybe like to start with Ivana. So if you can give your perspective, we have agreed beforehand, so please no longer than, I would say, 3 minutes each, so that we can still have an interactive session afterwards. So I will try to be a timekeeper as well as I can. I will look at you with a fierce way if you're starting for too long.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here because stock exchanges are the ones who are trying to provide financing for the SMEs and, of course, for the larger companies during and after the crisis. And I have to say that it's a big fight against our bankocentric environment in the Europe, especially in the smaller countries. So the companies and the SMEs which actually brought us out of the crisis didn't have many financing options because, as you know, during the crisis, banks are decreasing their appetite for risk and they had to turn the other ways. I always say that lack of capital and lack of financing through the exchanges in Europe is actually changing the perspective of the European Union to be competitive on the long run. Because if you look at, for instance, US, who has much more risk-oriented capital, they have created many unicorns, they have invested a lot into technology, and I think there is still place to change that. So during the crisis, the biggest help actually came through the packages of European Union and through local governments, but the capital markets, because of the additional risks they saw, didn't really offer enough financing possibilities. Also, we have to take into concern, at least in my country, almost all the companies are SMEs according to the European classification. If we look at that, the burdening of reporting that is increasing every year for such size of companies is really immense cost. and they see it as a continuous obstacle in their work. So I think what should be actually done is more consideration for these smaller players or smaller companies which have helped our countries to recover from the crisis, the V-shaped crisis, and to give them some light treatment, if I can say so, when they want to finance their business through the capital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. I would now like to turn to Paolo. Different perspective, maybe just as a bit of a challenge. I saw a recent report from the EBRD with quite some critical remarks that there was even too much finance out there in the market. So maybe you want to react a bit to that and explain a bit what, from the EBRD perspectives, are the lessons learned from the COVID crisis and the subsequent ones.
Thank you. No, I don't know those colleagues that said there was too much money in the market, but I'll get to it. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and it's great to be here. Looks slightly different from my bedroom, which is the place where I generally do these things. Although with the lights, I really can't tell. But I know we're supposed to talk about practical examples, but maybe if we just step back a little bit about the concepts and the reasons why SMEs are the ones that have suffered the most in crisis. And it's really down to two very simple principles. Number one is limited diversification, and I don't mean just limited diversifications in terms of customers. I mean also limited diversifications in terms of end markets, limited diversifications in terms of suppliers, and then the ones that everyone generally focuses on, which is limited diversifications of sources of funding. And then the second part, which makes the whole thing more complicated for the SME sector, is limited buffers, and that is liquidity, but also human resources. Surely, if you have in your team someone that has dealt with a situation that had similar effect to whatever crisis you're dealing with, it'll make your life easier. But if you don't, that's the problems. And this is why what we've learned, at least in our, by the way, I should have said at the beginning, I'm in charge of the creation of financial products for the SME sector in our country of operations. What we kind of came to the conclusion to is that it's very, very difficult to address the issues of SMEs during a crisis. And our best bet is to do it before. Because during a crisis, it's such a heterogeneous sector, and you really just want to focus on the big things. You want to help the big banks, you want to help the big corporates, you sometimes want to help the governments, hoping that by fixing those problems, you also will fix the issues of SMEs. And sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. It kind of depends on the crisis and the situation. So I know we're supposed to talk about concepts, but practical examples, but I want to set this out. In terms of what has worked for us, very clearly what we've seen is the provision of knowledge, the provisions of pertinent expertise, and that is particularly important for the micro sector, and that is goes to compensate what I mentioned before, which is the lack of breadth and diversification in terms of human resources for the SMEs. That's something that worked. And then the other big thing that we've seen for slightly bigger companies is really to work with them to try and integrate them into local or international supply chains. And whether that is helping them with certifications, whether that is helping them with investments that are needed in order to be able to get the standards that I need to enter that particular relationship with a big foreign buyer. Why is this important? For two reasons. Number one, like I said before, I go back to it, the diversification. But second, and most importantly, is provides a technological pool, because the big buyer will always upgrade their system. So those are two main things. And then an obvious one is flexibility. Flexibility not just in terms of the repayments during crisis and understanding, but also on the number of provisions that often we have in agreements with SMEs that we just need to be able to relax during a period of crisis. I'll stop here. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you, Paolo. And I think we probably can come back in the future looking part on the aspect of the integration of SMEs in international supply chains, which is both, of course, an opportunity, but which has also been particularly challenging recently. So let me now turn to Jan. I understand you have been particularly focusing on AI issues, but also on other aspects. So if you can bring in your perspective on how you see what worked for SMEs during your time from the ministry perspective.
Thank you, Christine. And it's quite relevant to mention that I also have the pleasure to serve as co-chair of the European Blockchain Partnership. And I know you all can start a little bit smiling, saying blockchain, but we are not going to talk about FTX or Bitcoin. There is something you probably heard about. It's called the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure, and it's a ledger built by our friends from Connect and from European Commission, from DG Connect and DG Digit. So just let me give you in 1 minute just a short example. How we decided to help the SMEs in very practical terms. We know, looking at different sources like EBRD or EIF's indexes, that access to finance is a problem not just in Central and Eastern Europe for SMEs, but also in the Southern European part. Some countries like Estonia, even in Baltics, are under the average. That's the reason why the Czech Republic decided to initiate so-called European-wide bond market for SMEs, for green and digital bonds, and it will be based on the EPSI, on the European ledger. You may ask why. Basically, Paolo gave us the reason. We need to have a better and, let's say, more efficient access to finance. So how? There will be a consortium selected by the DG Connect under the Digital Euro program, building on top of the EPSI of the European ledger, special system, basically a pan-European market for green and digital bonds. And then this market will be open to many players, as well as traditional and, we hope, new fintechs and, let's say, new players. From the perspective of the SME, it should be very easy to issue bonds, to raise not the capital but debt, and we can then talk a little bit more why debt, not equity. But what's important, it should be very, very easy and very cheap to do so. From the point of view of investor, we can say that, for instance, someone from Norway or Sweden can invest in for instance, their favorite hotel in Croatia or somewhere else, or you can support your favorite SME in your neighborhood. The main issue here is to connect the investors with the SMEs, and we know that if we do that in, let's say, specific member states, this is not going to work. We need to build it on the common market. That's the original idea of the Capital Markets Union, and we want to, and I believe we will, with the help from our friends in the European Commission, we will make it happen. So next year there will be let's say, the building phase based on the Digital Euro program call, and then the pilot testing will happen in 2024. And we hope that this project will help with the recovery of the SMEs from the current crisis and from the, let's say, last couple of very challenging years.
Thank you. So, like your neighbor Ivana, you're insisting on the needs, let's say, for alternative finance for SMEs apart from the classical loan. Thanks. Let me now turn to Katarina Kakalikova. So you're working not exactly for an SME, MasterCard. So what are your lessons learned, and how, I mean, maybe you can even explain sort of how you come into this equation for the SMEs.
Yes, of course. So indeed, MasterCard is not an SME, but we do work a lot with SMEs because basically these are, at the end of the day, also our clients. So what we are really looking towards is to create a sustainable economic growth among the SMEs or micro enterprises, and basically create a strongly functioning and sustainable, resilient ecosystem. Maybe what we have seen from the first pandemic, the the COVID pandemic was that basically we have seen that there was the push that we have seen already prior to the pandemic to move to the digital platforms and digital processes has of course intensified. And this has created many opportunities for some, but of course also brought or pushed many maybe a little bit less digitally savvy companies almost to the brink of failure. And this was the reason why also MasterCard decided to address the issue, because we saw that economic growth as such, only economic growth can sometimes be a little bit short-lived. What became quite obvious from the pandemic was that what is really important is that we build resilience. We build resilience, especially for the micro and small businesses, because I think you already mentioned, what the challenges are and how limited they are in resources, not only financial but also human and others. And so we wanted to support the companies in a way to really build their resilience. So we have launched a program called Strive about a year ago that has an objective to invest at least $25 million into supporting building the resilience of micro and small businesses. It's not a long time ago, but we are already seeing first results in the UK, where the program has been launched last year. Our objective is really to touch maybe 5 million companies across the world, to help them get digitally ready, to help them become more resilient, and to help them become also digitally savvy and innovative. We have also tried to really look into what needs to be done, not only trying to provide financing, because I think there are different players to do that in the markets, but we really try to address also different areas. And you mentioned also nicely that what's necessary is also knowledge. So we try to address, trying to provide to the SMEs or micro and small and businesses with the tools to be able to cope alone.
So you're actually also going in a way into the skill space, but do you also apply like differentiated rates for SMEs, like during crisis, to keep them engaged, or?
There are some examples of that during the COVID pandemic specifically. So, for example, you have maybe heard there's a little bit rather small program that we launched in Czech Republic with the Ministry of Industry and Trade. That's called Czechia Pays by Card. That was specifically targeting micro and small businesses to go digital, to open digital acceptance for free for a limited period of time. So we were trying to leverage that. There's also another program that exists in Poland called Cashless Poland Foundation that was created many years ago, I think 5 years ago already, where about 500,000 businesses have already been supported in a similar manner as those in Czech Republic. When the COVID pandemic hit, of course, going from just normal physical card acceptance, we tried to support them in going digital. Not only, and we partnered, of course, with organizations, because not everything can be done by MasterCard, but we partnered also with organizations that would support them also on the ground, either with the technical assistance, but also with education to actually help them to go digital. So not only to open a website and to accept cards on the website, but to actually know what to do, how to do.
Okay, thanks. So we touched a lot on digital now with the last two speakers, so I think it's a good transition to you, Joanna. You work for Agora Robotics. Maybe you can explain how you come in the picture.
Well, I will focus my talk on our specific experience as an R&D focused small enterprise, and what we've learned during the past crisis, because when the pandemic started, we had like more than 10 years experience in R&D in different technological fields, especially in interactive installations. And during the past 5 years, we've focused a lot on robotics and autonomous mobile system. We've played with swarm robotics, social robotics, and when the pandemic hit, we had a functional prototype of autonomous floor cleaner, and we were in discussions with KPMG, Dacia, and several important potential clients. immediately we decided to adapt our platform into sanitizing autonomous robot. We've immediately sold the first 5, 6 robots. And in the same time, we saw that we have to make the transition from an R&D company to an industrial company. And this is when an EBRD grant really helped us with a consulting company that helped us redesign our business model, our business processes, our R&D process, and basically we were working during the lockdown 24 hours a day, more than we've worked before, in order to adapt the business to the new conditions and to try to foresee how the world will be after the end of the pandemics. So after we finished the robots, we hit another wall, and that wall was the public procurement system. And we, in a short time, decided we were not going to go into that market. It was not for us. We didn't like it. A small SME doesn't have the resources and doesn't have what it takes to succeed in that market. So we looked in the market, and we saw that we went back to our initial clients, which are basically, we are trying to automate logistic processes and warehouse management. And we were trying to see what were the best resilience strategies for our clients and what challenges are they going to face in the next years, and how can we, through our solution, ensure a soft landing in that future for them. So our focus was to become a very important part in our clients' resilience strategy for the next years. And then, of course, we were looking for investment because we were bootstrapping on this whole R&D process. And another grant for R&D helped us because we had third-party evaluation of the company. We finished all our marketing and go-to-market strategy, and we put our company in order. We've also, with the help of EBRD, which sent us to Taipei Computex, completely changed our supply chain. We've moved all our parts from China to Taiwan, but we further improved our supply chain based on nearshoring. So everything we find in Europe, we buy in Europe. We wanted to develop a European autonomous robot as much as possible, also from the parts, from the software. And this is one of our challenges now. And after the pandemic, we have found a good investor because it's a leading company in solar panel energy in Romania. And they are business partners, not just investors, and they took the burden of sales and go to market so that we can really focus on R&D, because this is what we do best and this is what we need to focus on. And we are now working with our partners for crisis-proof synergies in the field of solar farm management and agrovoltaic autonomous solutions.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that brings an interesting perspective from a company at the, I would say, receiving end. And what I take from that as well is that, I mean, finance is one issue, but then you mentioned support, or for instance, the whole issue of procurement. There's a session on innovative procurement, I think, this afternoon. Yeah. Because indeed, this is where this is what we're always struggling with, that if you have to establish a track record for the last 2 years, your figures, etc., you don't have this as an innovative company. So we must not forget the other angles which need to be brought in. So I would like to do a second round, and then we will take also questions from the floor. So now looking a bit more sort of towards the future. I mean, resilience came up a lot. Resilience, I mean, for let's say I would say the finance system as a whole, for the individual companies. And I would like to ask, so based on what we learned from the crisis, so how do you think we can improve this future resilience? And I would like maybe, I mean, if you can come in on that, particularly the supply chain vulnerability. I mean, you talked about nearshoring. I think there is quite a different perspective now in terms of integrated supply chains, nearshoring, looking at like-minded geographies, I mean, diversification. So how you see that perspective. And as a second question, because like for instance also for those who, for stock exchange, etc., do you think that with the succession of crises we need even less one size fits all? Do we need to sort of really have different tools for different types of companies? Or do you think we still need a sort of common approach and then diversify in practice? So maybe I start with you again, Paolo.
Thank you very much for the very good questions. Sorry, traveling does come with additional risks. But if I try to address the supply chain financing point, the supply chain point first, there are a couple of things that I think we can do more of. First of all, I think SMEs, going back to the concepts, they're always dealing with today's issues, not tomorrow. And we all know the trends that are happening in the world and the stronger focus on ESG. And we know that because it's coming from consumers, because it's coming from big buyers, at some point, very soon, those requirements are going to filter through to the SME suppliers, whether it's the direct suppliers of the big company or the suppliers of suppliers. At some point, it will get there. And if the SMEs don't prepare for it, they will be in a very difficult position because at some point, the company will just procure from another business that already has undertaken that ESG journey. So I think the concept of having outcome-based financing, that's just a fancy word to say you do this and you will get a slightly cheaper financing as an SME, is a very powerful one because it gives the additional incentive that is needed. And obviously, it can be made concrete depending on, kind of basing on your second question, depending on the sector, because every sector has different requirements, depending on the country, because often there are different requirements, and really adapted on a case-by-case basis. But the overall concept is to incentivize the SMEs to undertake the ESG journey now, today. Is already too late, and not to leave it until the last minute. And the second point on how we can do things differently in terms of supply chain, at the moment is a concept. I don't think there is a lot of, I don't think it's a big sector, but it's beyond normal supply chain financing. I don't know how the public is familiar with supply chain financing, but effectively, very simply, the advancing of invoices, so the SME doesn't receive the money in 60 days or 90 days, or in some of the countries where EBRD operates can go up to 360 days, but they can just sell the invoice and get their cash up front with a small discount. The concept of deep-tier supply chain financing is the concept where the SMEs gets the money, but then also commits to accelerate the payments of their suppliers and then their suppliers, and then at some point, that's the end of the supply chain. So I think those are the two things that maybe we can do a little different. And then going back to the second question, the one size fits all, and I think it's just impossible. I mean, the SME sector is extremely heterogeneous. There is absolutely nothing in common between a micro enterprise running a small retail shop in your local town and an SME of 10 or 50 million turnover. So it has to be something tailored. It absolutely has to. And I think in terms of my own institution, and this is a bit of an auto-criticism, maybe also to myself and our own group, but we really don't experiment enough. A crisis is well, sometimes you need to experiment, but it's really not the best place to experiment. We should experiment before and really accept that we're not going to get it perfect, that we have to relax some conditions, that we cannot have the full control that we have on products that we developed and have used for 20 years. And we're guilty of not doing enough of it. And the more you experiment, when eventually the time of the crisis comes, you have a number of tools that you can play with, but that you have already tried and tested maybe a little bit before. So, sorry, a bit of a rant and not very cohesive, but those are my two attempted answers to your difficult questions.
Thank you. So I take it that you're advocating, in a way, smart finance with a focus on sustainability and, I mean, long-term perspective. Huh? So that's how I read your comments. Thank you. So maybe I would like to turn to Katharina. I mean, you already touched upon resilience beforehand as well. So looking now at the future, and of course, I mean, I'll ask a question afterwards more specifically, but we should always have in mind that we have here the SME Assembly, which is also, whose objective is to inspire us also as policymakers for the future. You know, we have the big SME relief package, which was announced by our presidents. So, I mean, I'll ask you more specifically about that afterwards, but I think also keeping that in mind when we look at building up the future resilience.
I think there are three things that I would want to mention when answering your question is that what we have seen or what we have learned, and we're trying to adopt that approach in our way we look at how we can support the SME sector. The first one would be that the ecosystem itself is as important as the SMEs, which means for us is that not only do we have to try to help digitalize the SMEs, we actually have to help digitalize and modernize and kind of motivate the whole ecosystem around them, which I mean all the organizations that support the SME sector, you know, chambers of commerce, microfinancing institutions, and the whole ecosystem around them needs to be innovative, digitally savvy, and ready to support. And probably one example of that would be that MasterCard partnered with microfinance last year as well to basically address this issue and try to digitize their processes and support them in delivering the end consumer. So in this way, the micro enterprises, you know, trainings and different types of support they need to on their journey to digital future. So that would be the first one, the ecosystem. The second one we talked a lot about, of course. SMEs being cash short, but they also time short. And I think, Paolo, you touched upon it already. But time short means that they need relatively easy and straightforward solutions, and they need easy access to them. And this is one of the reasons why we launched a program in the UK, also as part of this Strive program that I mentioned, with Digital Boost, which it means actually it helps to create one platform, let's call it, where the SMEs can actually get all the support from one end to another. So not only they actually learn, you know, what the benefits of the digitization for their business could be, and it is actually tailored also to their needs because every SME is indeed different. So it is important that these kind of tools address that. But they also learn, you know, what tools are good for them, how to use them, how to think innovatively also for their business, and how to even think big, because sometimes we encounter SMEs that tell us that we don't need to digitalize because we already have a lot of work. We wouldn't have time to do all that, to grow to different markets, to grow our customer ground. Actually, the reason that they don't use these digital tools, that's exactly why they don't have time for that. So it's important for us to really address also, you know, address their needs with simple tools, straightforward and adapted. And the last, but not least, would be that finance is indeed important, but we believe that also an innovative approach to, let's say, de-risking the capital is very important, and also the wraparound services again. So not only providing finances to these SMEs, but actually teaching them that getting a loan is actually a liability, and becoming more conscious of how to invest smartly. So these are the three things I would say that for the future I think would be important to work on.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I think that fits in nicely now. If Jan, I ask you, I mean, you put the emphasis also on the need to, I would say, skill up or encompass the entire ecosystem, which is certainly, I mean, for blockchain, this is certainly even more true. So what would your perspective be on the building the future resilience for the very different types of SMEs? Is blockchain for everyone, or?
Well, my answer would be, of course, technology. But it doesn't have to be necessarily, let's say, high-tech on all levels. Just take the example of retail market, well, mostly consisting of SMEs, corner stores. On the one hand, you can use AI, like one big tech we all know, or on the other hand, you can use, for instance, the RFID chips, quite usual in the automotive. It's a not high-tech technology, it's quite resilient. And this is a real project supported by our minister as well. You can use this not just to have a 24/7 automated store, but also to have the whole chain, let's say, under control, as is usual in the automotive. But on the other hand, you can have not just in time, but also finance in time. And now, with, for instance, blockchain technologies, DeFi, you can provide SMEs with the financing in time. So, for instance, if you're a corner store, you can pay your bills like every day, and you can pay it just in hour. That's basically what the technology on all the sides, the digitization, can achieve. Of course, you ask if there should be one platform. We know from the blockchain space that there is no one ledger, no one platform. On the other hand, I just presented our plan to make some kind of pan-European market. But what is very important is to have such any platform, basically, or any market open for players that can provide specific services for specific sectors. So, for instance, if you have enough data, if you have the interoperability, and if you have the open finance platform, basically, you can have fintechs or SME banks providing the specific services. And I strongly believe in decentralized finance. It's more efficient, it's more focused, it's more peer-to-peer. And basically, the idea is to have SMEs digitized using high-tech or low-tech, and using this as an advantage to provide, let's say, the timely and very specific financing to address the specific needs of every SME. That's it.
Thanks. Still a challenge, I think, for low-tech to be in a very high-tech space, but interesting. Ivana, you already mentioned in your first intervention how important it is to look at alternative finance sources apart from the traditional loan. And how do you build up, I would say, your own resilience for the future of the stock exchange, but also the resilience of the SMEs who use the stock exchange? Do you have any specific accompanying measures you have in mind? So how do you want to make both, I would say, your institution and the SMEs future-proof?
I'm coming from very traditional industry. However, we are in very challenging part of Europe, so we had to be creative. And 5 years ago, we started a partnership with Estonian company Funderbeam. And being an exchange and starting a equity crowdfunding platform, it was a huge news in the region. And this platform is still active. Why we did it? We did it because we wanted to expose ourselves for the first time to the companies who are not logical candidates for the exchange at this moment. But we were tired of, repeating that privatization and big companies should go to the exchange and so on are important. So we said, let's prove that if we can finance companies when they are small, that one day we will have the issuers of the future on the exchange. And this experiment at the first is still very successful, but it also more than ever showed me that European citizens who have ideas and who are entrepreneurs are not less creative than anywhere else in the world. However, whenever they pitch, and this is their first job, when they have a good idea, they have to pitch in front of investors. They have to have a number of investors to pitch to, and they have to develop in the right environment. I will give you a very plastic example. In Croatia, we are rich in terms of number of unicorns according to the citizens' number. So we have two. One is electric car producer Rimac, and the other one is Infobit, which is IT company. And they both have grown in Europe, but they are dreaming of listing and going to the US. And it's a big pity, because we don't want European companies to go over there just because investors are better understanding, the rules are a little bit more relaxed, they're paying higher valuations and so on, because they will hire people somewhere else, they will bring innovation somewhere else. So I think there is a huge work in front of financial system to support companies in good and bad times. I completely agree with what Paolo has said about making this happen during non-crisis, although it seems like we are living in a crisis. I fully agree with you all the time. However, we have to push more money into right directions, and we have to levy the number of the obstacles for the companies who are coming to the exchange. The new rules for reporting are coming every year. They are increasing the cost of the issuers, and they are really making companies to turn to some alternative ways and not keeping them here. And I see it as a huge problem. I don't think enough was done in this direction, and I think stronger support to the local capital markets in their respective countries should be more practical. It is not enough just to have regulation on the level of EU. We have to be more practical with the programs sponsoring the SMEs to go to the exchange and preparing them for the higher growth. Because now we have the situation where banks are dominant. They practically would give loans only to the companies that don't want loans because they're cash rich, and the ones that need loans cannot get it, and it's a lock situation.
Thank you, Ivan. I think it's a very interesting perspective. You mentioned Rimac. We actually we visited together with the Envoy Network, this very impressive company, but I think you're putting your finger on a very important point on where companies want to go on the stock exchange. And this is certainly something maybe also for our last round of issues, what we should also do at policy level to help that they, I mean, let's say if they want to go to a bigger stock exchange, that they rather go to Frankfurt, Paris, or somewhere else than to the US. So, Joanna, you already, mentioned how you try to build up resilience also of your company. You can address any of the issues I asked in the question, but maybe also go a bit deeper into what you explained, that you're trying to near-shore or diversify your sources of supply, because I think that's a very interesting aspect which we also look at from a policy context, and which has a whole new dimension now when we discovered all of a sudden that certain supplies come from Belarus or Russia, and there are very few alternatives. So maybe you can give a practical insight also.
When we started to build robots, it was one of our it was in our vision that we want to make EU robots. We want them to be made in EU with EU components and everything. And we've looked onto the market, and we've looked onto the needs of our clients. And we said, okay, what can we make different than the other companies? And we saw that there's a gap in adoption of this technology because it's very expensive. In the current paradigm, you need very expensive engineers to help you use the actual robot. So we said, okay, we're going to do to autonomous robots what Apple did to computers. We're going to build an ecosystem, like you have the Apple ecosystem, and we're going to democratize the use of robots, make it very easy and intuitive to use, and invest a lot of R&D in building the platform to support an ecosystem, and invest a lot in the UX so that our clients will be able to use the robots with their existing stuff. So you can take an employee who usually drives the machine that washes the floor and train him to use an autonomous robot without any technical background. When we faced the capital market, it was true that the most generous offers came from the US, and it was like everybody asked, why don't you go? You have to go to the US. We had this, everybody knows the biggest unicorn in Europe, UiPath, is now an American company. And it was very difficult to explain why we want to stay in Europe, and more than that, we want to remain in Romania, because it was counterintuitive. And I think R&D needs support. Our biggest challenge right now is that we have to train our programmers, because even though Romania is this huge IT hub, we don't find robot operating system developers. So we have to take young, very smart programmers and invest in them to teach them to program robots. And this is a big challenge for us. And also, we work in a company that's very time sensitive, because robotics is developing very fast. And our decision, we decided to slow down and not go on the market with products, but wait until we are able to build a viable ecosystem of products, so that we can solve the problems of our companies, but also offer them seamless integration and intuitive use of this ecosystem, and give them a simple app on the phone for fleet management. And this means more time and money for R&D, and we go to the market later, and we have this focus on mid-term instead of short-term, and we have to convince our investors, we have to convince ourselves, we have to explain this all the time, this strategy. And I think this is where the efforts should be put on R&D and long-term R&D philosophy, let's say.
No, thank you. A very interesting perspective. So for the last bit of our discussion, I can already pre-warn you what I'm going to ask you quickly in the last round, and that is basically, having in mind the announced SME relief package, and take it broader. It's not only about relief, I would say, it's also about positive incentives. Please let me know your one or two wishes to the European Commission, what you think we should be doing at our level from a policy side to help this relief. But before that, I would just like to check whether there is any question from this Slido, or no, I don't see anything from Slido, but I think we can take very quickly two. I don't think we have more time for more, but if you just come in quickly. Yeah. The question is whether blockchain is a more sophisticated technology for crowdfunding or something else. And then quickly the other one, because since we have no mics, actually I realize it's complicated. Yep. Okay, so the question was how to incentivize the startups right from the beginning to integrate sustainability considerations into their strategy. So I would suggest, since we have, I think, more or less 7-8 minutes left, so if you can, I go around, if you can come up with your suggestions to us as policymakers, what you want to see in the relief package, and then, I mean, blockchain is clear, that's for you, and to everyone's, maybe you want to integrate also the reply on the sustainability.
Yes. Well, I only have one wish, and by and large, you've already been doing it, so I think it's a question of doing more of that. But I go back to the concept that I was saying before, that we don't experiment enough. And I'm just thinking, you know, at the very beginning, this is a very heterogeneous panel, but we leave this panel and we probably will never speak again, the 5 of us, in the same room. And if, as part of your effort, you say, okay, well, here is a call for action. This is what we want to achieve. Okay, we want to help this particular aspect of the SME. But to qualify for this, you need to have an IFI, you need to have a payment solution company, you need to have 2 SMEs working together, you need a new technology, you need an exchange, and put together actors, then we will be forced to actually spend time and invest time going outside of our normal partnerships. And it may sound idealistic and dreamland, but I really don't think it is, and it's much, much needed, because, like I said, we always need new tools, and if we don't cooperate with parties that we don't generally cooperate with, then it's going to be hard to find it. On the question that came from the audience, the second one, unfortunately, I wasn't able to catch the last word. Staffers, or anyway, the adoption of ESG practices, how can we do it?
For startups.
Huh?
For startups.
Startups, okay. Thank you for that. Okay, I think that the best way to do it is just to link knowledge with availability of cheaper money, and you know, there's a lot of focus on non-financial services. There's a lot of noise, but what I would love in an ideal world is that what we have is a set of courses that you complete, and if you complete them successfully, I'm not talking about something you do in 15 minutes, I'm talking about a proper journey, I'm talking about a proper curriculum. If you complete them, you will be eligible for slightly better pricing on the loans that you'll be asking your financial institution of choice. Why is that the case? Because more knowledge would mean less risk. Less risk demands lower pricing. And that would be my answer to that.
Okay, thanks, Paolo. So I take a lot of experimentation. So for the others, if you could try to be crisp and sharp, your opportunity to ask what you want from us.
Honestly, I think Paolo answered my wish, and that was more integration of different types of partners. Of course, me being from MasterCard, integration of big companies also in the equation of discussing. We have a lot to offer, and we're savvy to offer and work together. So that would be my ask.
Okay, thank you. Ivana, what?
We are part of FESE, and FESE has actively commented on the listing act that is now being created. We really need, and this is what we are actually asking as exchanges, is simplification of prospectus, simplification of secondary issuance when the companies want to raise money again, application of market abuse regulation to all SMEs is a big burden for them. And at the end, we are critically missing in Europe equity research coverage. That was not touched today. But because of MiFID II and some prior regulations, we have basically even countries in Europe that don't have a single provider of the equity research. So some measures to enhance that again are very, very welcome.
Thanks. Jan, your wish and a quick answer to the question.
Well, my quick answer is that crowdfunding really can be quite an interesting application of blockchain, but in fact, there's much more. Happy to discuss afterwards. However, the key is the full decentralization So there is no central entity organizing the market. So basically the market without the stock exchange, sorry. But basically that's it. That's something we need to achieve. We haven't seen yet. And that's also my wish for the policy to support this new, let's say, just technologies, but to the ways to organize the markets in much more efficient way and to open the basically common market also for financial intermediaries, as you mentioned, on this level. So the banks and other institutions can really compete on the pan-European level.
Thank you. Joanna, you already mentioned the need for a more medium long-term perspective in R&D financing. What else would you like from us?
Maybe creating a mechanism for us, the deep tech companies, to be able to get support for training tech specialists that outside the university curriculum. Because we are doing a lot of that for many years. Even before we were in robotics, we had many workshops with students from architecture and automatics and so on, and we were teaching them instruments that were very important, but they were not in the university curriculum. And if we could do this in a more organized way and get support precisely for this, it would be great. We would be happy to train students or young professionals in specific robotic coding, and of course it would be beneficial for creating knowledge in our field.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to all the panelists. I have to say I found it, I hope it was the same for those listening here and on screen. It was a very interesting discussion because indeed I think we come from very different perspectives, and I think it was interesting to put them together. So I take away indeed the need for experimentation, for obviously crisis preparedness ahead of, let's say, the next different crisis. I'm sure we will be facing, crisis always comes from an angle you don't expect it. I suppose that's the nature of the crisis, otherwise it wouldn't be one, but to prepare this resilience as much as possible. Then of course I took some of the very specific requests you are having. I would also like to pick up on your point on the skills more broadly, and this is something we'll definitely look at because, we have different skills academies in certain sort of very promising areas, like for instance, we have a battery academy where we bring, in people with different backgrounds. And I think this sort of interdisciplinary, robotics academy could be very interesting to bring in the different
And I would also
aspects.
like to add something. We come from an indie zone of entrepreneurship. None of our technological members of the team actually have academic credits for the field of their working. And usually when you enter such an academy, you are asked for academic credits. But our CTO has a design diploma, our mechanical engineer has a management diploma. They are all self-taught with the instruments from the internet and by working for the last 15 years. And this was a barrier for us.
No,
we were asked for.
I got that aspect. I think that's very interesting because that's indeed what an academy can bring in. I think we need to wrap up because I see this red light is over time already, and I suppose you also want to move to the lunch. But indeed, I think this is, I would say democratizing, but also I would say bringing in different skills. This has become very prominent in the context, of course, of integrating migrant workers or refugees, because they often have skills, but they don't have the formal qualifications. Yes. So I think there actually coding has already, played a very important role in terms of integrating into the labor market. So we'll pick the different issues up. And so thank you very much to everyone. And indeed, if there were further questions, because I think it was actually not foreseen to have interactive questions, but I wanted to still ask. So please go and get to the different speakers and ask your questions. So And with that, we will certainly continue to, to discuss this. Maybe we can actually pick up this format again, and I hope we'll have an interesting mingling lunch now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Christine, thank you for your closing. Thank you all to your great notes and for your speeches here. And to you, I, of course, continue at enjoy your lunch. Now there is a networking lunch. After that, please be seated at 2:30. Either here in the Hall C, we will have a policy workshop called Supply Chain Security, Impact of Russia's War Against Ukraine on EU supply chains and solutions to ensure future stability. Or you can go to the room D34, where is a policy workshop entitled Aerospace Technology and Data Opportunities for SMEs. Or you can go to room D89. We have a policy workshop there called Innovation Procurement, which would be the latest session for this afternoon. I hope that we will see each other tomorrow. Maybe you might go also for the evening program where there might be some of you awarded by prizes we have prepared for you. So either see you tomorrow, maybe see you with your other colleagues in the evening. Good afternoon.